Hello, brother. How was your day today? If possible, please let me know where you are on Earth. As for me, my day was quite boring. Let me share it with you. Today at school, I had a bit of a debate with my classmates on the following topics: controversial theories. The question here is the lost city that proves Plato was right, and I will share my personal views. Let's analyze it together. You are standing on the precipice of a discovery so profound it threatens to rewrite the very first chapter of human civilization. Before you, laid bare by the winds of time, are the remnants of a concentric city, a perfect bullseye carved into the earth, baking under an unforgiving sun. It's a place that shouldn't exist, a ghost from a time we've been told was primitive and unengineered. After this video, you'll never look at the world the same way. Before the tension gets too high, take a moment to like the episode and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, prepare yourself, and let's unravel this hidden truth together. You are not in the sun-scorched desert just yet. Instead, you find yourself in a quiet, cavernous library, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and leather. In your hands, you hold the key. It isn't a map of rusted metal or a crystal skull, but something far more potent, an idea preserved in the ink of an Athenian philosopher. You are reading two of Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. It is a verifiable historical fact that these texts were written around 360 BCE, the work of one of history's most revered thinkers. For centuries, they have been required reading for students of philosophy, treated as elegant thought experiments. But as you trace the words, you begin to feel a chilling dissonance. This doesn't read like a fable. The level of detail is obsessive, almost technical. The story is relayed through the character Critias, who claims he is reciting a tale passed down through his family for generations. This isn't just any story, it's a sacred, secret history. Entrusted to his great-grandfather by the Athenian statesman Solon, one of the 7 sages of Greece. And where did Solon get it? From the sanctums of the Egyptian priesthood, guardians of records said to stretch back millennia before their own civilization began. They spoke of a world before a great forgetting, a time when another power held dominion over the seas. They spoke of Atlantis. This is the first bizarre detail that snags in your mind. A snag that mainstream history has tried to smooth over for 2,000 years. The story's origin is not presented as a philosopher's invention, but as a verbatim historical account from the world's oldest record keepers. The Egyptian priest allegedly chided Solon, telling him that the Greeks were like children. With no ancient opinions or knowledge hoary with age, they had forgotten their own greatest deed. The day their ancestors stood alone against a mighty empire that had emerged from the Atlantic Ocean, you lean closer, absorbing the narrative. Plato, through Critias, describes this empire in startling detail. He says it was founded by Poseidon, the god of the sea, who fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito. On a central hill, he built a sanctuary for her, enclosing it with 3 concentric rings of water and 2 of land, a perfect, divinely engineered fortress. This island kingdom, Atlantis, became the seat of a powerful and noble lineage of kings. For generations, they ruled with wisdom, scorning everything but virtue. They were rich beyond measure, their lands abundant with precious metals. Exotic wildlife including elephant sand, a mysterious gleaming red metal that was second only to gold in value, or orichalcum. But as the divine portion of their bloodline thinned over generations, their human nature took over. Avarice and ambition corrupted them. They became a tyrannical naval power, their armies swarming through the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, to enslave the nations of the Mediterranean. They subjugated parts of Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia, the heart of modern Italy. All seemed lost, yet one small nation stood against this seemingly invincible force: ancient Athens. Your Athens, the character Critias tells his audience. The Athens of 9,000 years before his time. In a heroic single-handed effort, the prehistoric Athenians repelled the Atlantean invasion, liberating the enslaved peoples. But their victory was short-lived. In the wake of the war came a terrible reckoning. Plato's words are precise and devastating. There occurred violent earthquakes and floods. And in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth and the island of Atlantis. In like manner, disappeared in the depths of the sea. The words hang in the air of the silent library. A single day and night, an entire continent-sized island, a hub of advanced civilization, erased from existence in a geological instant. Over 2,400 years, the academic world has held a firm consensus. This is an allegory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of imperial hubris, a philosophical device to contrast a perfect, virtuous state, ancient Athens, with a corrupt, powerful one, Atlantis. The impossibly ancient date, the divine lineage, the cataclysmic end, all the hallmarks of myth. It's a neat, tidy explanation that keeps our established historical timeline safe and sound. It asks nothing of us, challenges nothing we believe to be true. But as you sit with the text, a different, more unsettling interpretation begins to form. The details feel too specific to be mere allegory. The concentric rings, the geographic location west of the Pillars of Gibraltar, the mountains to the north, the plain to the south, the dimensions of the canals, the types of stone used, black, white, and red. Why would a philosopher? The weight of Plato's words settles upon you, not as a story, but as testimony. Yet as you try to grasp the enormity of what he's suggesting, a powerful, centuries-old chorus of dissent rises to meet you. For over 2 millennia, the world's most respected minds have worked tirelessly to convince you that what you just read is nothing more than a beautiful lie. Your journey into this unexplained event is not just a search for a lost city. It's a battle against an intellectual firewall built to protect the very foundations of history. The first brick in that wall was laid by the one man whose opinion could rival Plato's, his own student, Aristotle. It is a verifiable historical fact that Aristotle, a man who catalogued the world with ruthless logic, is recorded as having dismissed the story entirely. Ancient sources quote him as stating the tale was invented by Plato, who then caused it to disappear. You can almost picture the scene. The young, brilliant Aristotle, frustrated with the mysticism of his master, deciding to clean house. To him, the world operated on observable principles, on cause and effect. A magical island sinking into the sea on the whim of the gods, it was intellectually untidy. It reeked of the old myths he was trying to replace with science and reason. His dismissal was not just a footnote. It was a verdict delivered by the future of Western thought. And for centuries, his word was law. If Aristotle said Atlantis was a fable, then a fable it was. The case was closed. This became the default setting for academia, the safe and sanctioned viewpoint. But why was it so important to shut the door on this idea? Here, you must look past the official explanations and examine the psychology at play. The belief in a linear progression of history is one of the most comforting narratives humanity has ever created. We tell ourselves that we started in caves, discovered fire, invented the wheel, built pyramids, and progressed steadily upwards to smartphones and space travel. We are the pinnacle, the most advanced version of humanity that has ever existed. The story of Atlantis is a virus in that operating system. It suggests a cyclical history of catastrophic peaks and valleys. It whispers that a civilization as advanced, or perhaps even more so, than our own existed in the deep past and was utterly annihilated. If it happened to them, the unspoken terror is that it can happen to us. The academic dismissal of Atlantis isn't just an intellectual stance. It's a psychological defense mechanism. It's easier to call Plato a liar than to confront the fragility of our own existence. This institutional denial created a vacuum, and for centuries, the idea of Atlantis went underground. It became the domain of mystics and esoteric dreamers. But then, in 1882, the story exploded back into the public consciousness. And it did so through a bizarre and unexpected vessel. A United States congressman from Minnesota named Ignatius Donnelly. Donnelly wasn't a wild-eyed occultist. He was a politician and amateur scientist who approached the problem with a lawyer's determination to build a case. This is the quirky detail that changes the texture of the investigation. The man who resurrected Atlantis for the modern age was a respected public official. He amassed a strange and compelling collection of evidence, arguing that all ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Mayan, Incan, were not independent inventions but colonies or refugee cultures descended from a single, powerful mother culture, Atlantis. Donnelly pointed to the pyramids in Egypt and Mexico, the practice of cranial modification. The arguments of scholars, and the ridicule of historians begin to fade into an indistinct murmur. You push them aside. The debate over whether Plato's story is fable or fact has raged for centuries. But it has largely ignored the most important piece of evidence, the document itself. You decide to stop treating the Critias as a piece of literature and start treating it as something else entirely, a field manual, an architect's blueprint, a witness statement. You are no longer a philosopher debating meaning. You are a forensic investigator searching for testable claims. The academic firewall was built to keep you from doing precisely this. From taking Plato at his word, you return to the text, your eyes scanning past the poetic flourishes and focusing on the raw data. The description of the capital city begins, and it is here that the narrative shifts from grand mythology to something that feels eerily like civil engineering. Plato, through Critias, lays out a blueprint of such geometric purity, it feels almost alien. The city was not a chaotic sprawl like ancient Rome or Athens. It was a perfect concentric design. At its very heart was a small hill, the sacred ground where Poseidon had built a shrine for his mortal love, Cleito. This central island was the citadel, the nerve center of the entire empire. Now, the blueprint unfolds. Encircling this central island were alternating rings of water and land. Plato is unnervingly specific. There were 3 rings of sea and 2 of land, carved from the earth as if by a divine compass. You lean in, tracing the dimensions, translating the ancient measurements into a modern mental image. The central island, housing the royal palace and temples, was 5 stadia in diameter. A Greek stadion was about 607 feet, or 185 meters, making this central hub just under a mile across. Encircling it was the first ring of water, 1 stadium wide. Then a ring of land, 2 stadia wide. Then a second, larger ring of water, 2 stadia wide. Then the largest ring of land, 3 stadia wide. Finally, the outermost ring of water, connected to the open sea, was 3 stadia wide. You pause, letting the scale of this structure sink in. It's a vast, nested series of circles with a total diameter of around 27 stadia, or nearly 3 miles from edge to edge. This wasn't a village. It was a sprawling, meticulously planned metropolis. And the engineering didn't stop there. A massive canal, 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep, was cut from the outermost water ring running 50 stadia, almost 6 miles south, through the coastal plain to the ocean. This allowed ships to sail directly from the sea into the heart of the city's ring system. For centuries, the search for Atlantis was a search conducted in libraries and in the abstract realms of philosophy. You have been sifting through ancient texts, weighing the words of long-dead scholars. But now the investigation takes a sudden, vertigo-inducing leap. You are no longer in a library. You are floating in the silent blackness of space, looking down at the sun-baked expanse of West Africa. Below you lies the Sahara Desert, a seemingly infinite ocean of sand and rock, the largest hot desert in the world. From this godlike vantage point, the earth reveals secrets it keeps hidden from those walking its surface. And as you gaze upon the nation of Mauritania, you see it. Something that stops your breath. There, in the midst of the desolate landscape, is a structure so perfect, so geometrically startling. It looks like a piece of cosmic art. It is a vast, intricate bullseye carved into the desert floor. A series of near-perfect concentric rings, one nestled inside the other. Spanning nearly 25 miles, 40 kilometers in diameter. It is so enormous that its true shape can only be fully appreciated from orbit. On the ground, you would be lost within it, seeing only rolling hills and rocky outcrops, oblivious to the grand design you were a part of. From up here, it is unmistakable, an eye staring back at you from the face of the earth. This is the Richat Structure, known to geologists as the Eye of the Sahara. And as you stare at this impossible formation, the words of Plato, the blueprint you just deconstructed, come rushing back with chilling force. Concentric rings of land and water, a city built like a target. The image in your mind, born from a 2,400-year-old text, is now laid out before you, etched into the planet itself. The resemblance is not just passing. It is profound and deeply unsettling. The structure's very existence feels like a challenge to logic, a riddle posed by the Earth itself. This is the verifiable historical fact that grounds this part of the mystery, until the age of space travel. The Richat Structure was largely unknown to the wider world. It's a quirky detail that while local tribes knew of it, its true, magnificent form was a secret kept by the planet, until we developed the technology to see ourselves from above. It first entered the modern consciousness in the 1960s, during the early days of human spaceflight. Astronauts on the Gemini missions, including James McDivitt and Ed White on Gemini 4 in 1965, were baffled by it. In the featureless expanse of the Sahara, this giant geological eye became a crucial landmark for them, a reassuring anchor point in their orbital path. They reported it, photographed it, and wondered what on earth could have created it. The initial theory was that it must be a massive impact crater. A bullseye on that scale screams asteroid, but that theory was quickly discarded. When geologists finally reached the remote site to investigate, they found none of the telltale signs. The official explanation, a deeply eroded geologic dome, is a comforting, sterile answer. It neatly files the eye of the Sahara away in a drawer labeled Natural Wonders. But you can't close the drawer. The image of the structure is burned into your mind, and Plato's blueprint is laid out on the desk before you. The intellectual part of your brain accepts the geological explanation. The intuitive, pattern-seeking part of your brain is screaming that something is profoundly wrong. So you engage in the simplest, most powerful act of investigation available in the 21st century. You open a satellite mapping program. This is a verifiable fact of our modern age, the democratization of discovery. For less than the cost of a single textbook, anyone with an internet connection can access high-resolution satellite imagery of the entire planet. What was once the exclusive domain of spy agencies and geological surveys is now at your fingertips. You are leveraging a technology that would have seemed like divine omniscience to Plato, Aristotle, and every explorer who ever hunted for Atlantis with a ship and a sextant. You type in the coordinates for the Richat Structure, and there it is, filling your screen. Now, you place Plato's blueprint beside it. The comparison begins. You start at the center, just as Plato did. His text describes a central island, the original hill where Poseidon built his sanctuary.
Ow.
Looking at the satellite image, you see the heart of the Richat Structure is a relatively flat, circular plateau. It's the bullseye. Geologists say this is the core of the ancient dome. You see it as the ghost of Plato's Citadel Island. You trace its outline with your finger on the screen. Next, the rings. Plato described 3 rings of water and 2 of land. At first glance, the Richat Structure seems to have dozens of concentric circles, a chaotic ripple effect. But you look closer, filtering out the noise of eons of erosion. You focus on the most prominent defining features. Encircling the central plateau is a distinct circular valley or depression. This, you hypothesize, was Plato's first ring of water. Beyond it rises a prominent, rugged circular ridge of rock. This is the first land ring. Beyond that ridge lies another wider circular valley, the second water ring. And beyond that, another, even more massive and clearly defined rocky ridge, the second land ring. Finally, encircling the entire main structure is a broader, lower-lying basin. The third and final water ring? The pattern is there. It is not pristine. It is not the perfect, divine geometry from the myth. It is weathered, fractured, and partially obscured by time.
Yes.
But the fundamental pattern of island, water, land, water, land, water is undeniably present. It's like finding a shattered piece of pottery and being able to recognize the intricate design it once held. The geologists see stratified layers of eroded rock. You see the ghostly imprint of a metropolis. The ridges are the foundations of the land rings where people lived and worked. The valleys are the empty canals where their ships once sailed. This is where you encounter the work of a strange, modern-day historical organization with no public records, no headquarters, and no... The visual comparison is unnerving, a ghostly echo across millennia. But an echo is not proof. A resemblance, however striking, can be dismissed as coincidence. Your investigation now pivots from the subjective realm of pattern recognition to the cold, hard domain of mathematics. You need numbers. You need to take the blueprint you extracted from Plato and lay it over the satellite image of the Richat Structure. It's not as a visual guide, but as a set of precise architectural specifications. You are about to measure a ghost. Using the digital ruler in your satellite imaging software, you prepare to cross-reference to worlds, the Athens of 360 BCE and the Sahara Desert of the 21st century. The primary unit of measurement in your ancient blueprint is the stadion. This is the first hurdle. And it's a verifiable historical fact that there was no single, universally standardized stadion in the ancient world. The length varied slightly from place to place. The Attic stadion, used in Athens, was about 185 meters, or 607 feet. The Olympic stadion was slightly different, around 192 meters. For your analysis, you must choose a value. Settle on the 185-meter Attic stadion, the most likely unit Plato himself would have used. This small uncertainty is your first taste of the ambiguity inherent in resurrecting a lost world. You are already forced to make an educated guess. You begin with the most crucial measurement, the total diameter of the city itself. You return to Plato's text, summing the dimensions he provided for the core metropolitan area, the central island, the 2 land rings, and the 3 water rings. The calculation is straightforward. The total diameter of the concentric city was 27 stadia. You do the conversion? 27 stadia multiplied by 185 meters per stadion equals 4,995 meters. Just under 5 kilometers, or about 3 miles. Now, you turn to the satellite image. With the digital ruler, you measure the diameter of the Richat structure. The number that flashes on your screen is jarring. It's not 5 kilometers. It's nearly 40 kilometers, or 25 miles. The discrepancy is immense. A wave of disappointment washes over you. The visual match was so perfect, so seductive, but the numbers don't lie. The scale is completely wrong. It's an order of magnitude off. The theory which seemed so promising just moments ago appears to collapse into dust. The geologists were right. It's just a big, beautiful rock. But you hesitate. Remember the lineage of the story, Plato to Cratias to Solon to the Egyptian priests. A story passed down through generations, translated across languages and cultures. From Egyptian hieroglyphs to Greek prose, how many opportunities for error were there in that chain of transmission? And you remember a bizarre detail, a recurring theme in the esoteric study of ancient texts. It is the idea of the intentional. The numbers on your screen are a ghost symphony, a mathematical harmony echoing across 12 millennia. The shock of the factor of 10 cipher, the key that made the blueprint fit the location, is still resonating through you. But a city is not just its measurements. It is a part of a landscape. It exists in a geographic context. A blueprint is useless without a plot of land. So you return to the cretas, but this time you ignore the dimensions and the metals. You are looking for the bigger picture, for the environmental clues that would ground this mythical city in a real-world location, and Plato, as always, provides. He paints a very specific landscape, a setting that is as much a character in the story as the city itself. This is the verifiable historical fact, straight from his text. The city of Atlantis was not on an open plain, exposed to the elements. It was nestled in a very particular geography. To the north, Plato states, the region was sheltered by mountains, celebrated for their number, size, and beauty. He adds a crucial detail. These mountains served a practical purpose, protecting the inhabitants from the cold north wind and ensuring the land received abundant rainfall. Below these mountains, the city overlooked a great oblong plain that stretched for thousands of stadia. This plain was described as level, fertile, and surrounded by a massive, man-made canal that collected the water flowing down from the mountains. And finally, the most critical piece of geographical data. This plain opened up to the sea on its southern side. The great canal that allowed ships to enter the city's heart ran south across this plain to the Atlantic Ocean. The blueprint is clear. Mountains to the north, large plain, the ocean to the south. You turn back to your satellite view of the planet, your cursor hovering over the eye of the Sahara. You zoom out, expanding your field of vision beyond the concentric rings. The picture widens from a city to a region, from a region to a continent. You pan your view north. The landscape of Mauritania begins to ripple and rise, the flat desert giving way to a rugged, elevated escarpment of dark rock. This is the Adra Plateau. To a ground-level observer, it is a formidable range of mountains and cliffs, some rising hundreds of meters above the surrounding desert. They are directly north of the Richat Structure, looming over it like ancient guardians. They form a natural barrier, a great wall separating the Richat from the deeper Sahara to the north, mountains to the north. Check. You pan your view south. Today, your screen shows only an endless sea of sand, the Urguarain, stretching for hundreds of miles. The modern Atlantic coast is a distant line on the horizon. This, the skeptic would argue, is the fatal flaw. Plato describes a fertile plain and an ocean, not the world's largest desert, but you are not looking at today's world. You are looking for a world that existed 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. You are looking for a world of catastrophic climate change, of melting ice caps, and radically different weather patterns. And science tells you that the Sahara was not always a desert. The geographical puzzle pieces are laid out before you, forming a picture that is both deeply compelling and profoundly heretical. Mountains to the north, a vast plain, and an ancient sea to the south. Yet one piece is still obscured, buried under the weight of the modern world's most intimidating feature, the sand. The Sahara Desert as you know it, a symbol of lifeless desolation, is the single greatest argument against this location. It is a wall of sand that seems to suffocate any possibility of a thriving, water-based civilization. But your investigation now leads you to a startling realization. That wall is an illusion. The desert is a mask, and modern science has just given you the tools to see through it. You are about to discover that the Sahara's current state is not an eternal condition but a recent development. This is a verifiable scientific fact, confirmed by decades of geological and climatological research. The African humid period, for thousands of years, peaking between roughly 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert, it was a vibrant green savanna. Monsoon rains, shifted far north of their present-day location, drenched the landscape. What are now barren wadis were powerful, flowing rivers. What are now salt flats were vast, deep freshwater lakes, some the size of small countries. Rock art found scattered across the Sahara corroborates this, depicting scenes not of camels and sand dunes, but of people swimming, and of giraffes, crocodiles. And elephants, the very same animal Plato specifically mentioned, was abundant in Atlantis. This green Sahara is the world in which the Atlantean civilization would have existed. The Great Plain Plato described was not a desert, but a fertile expanse of grassland and river valleys, fed by the waters flowing from the Ajar Mountains to the north. But how can you be sure? How can you see a world that has been buried under sand for 5 millennia? This is where the story takes a turn into the realm of technological sorcery, providing a bizarre and powerful tool for deciphering the past. In the 1980s and 90s, NASA's space shuttles carried a revolutionary instrument called spaceborne imaging radar, sir. Unlike conventional cameras that see visible light, this radar could penetrate through dry sand, dust, and sediment. For the first time, humanity had a form of technological X-ray vision to peer beneath the surface of the deserts. When they turned this radar eye on the Sahara, the results were breathtaking. Where our eyes see only an ocean of sand, the radar revealed a hidden world beneath. It mapped out a massive, intricate network of paleo rivers, the ghostly imprints of ancient river systems, some as wide as the modern Nile, all perfectly preserved beneath the dunes. You are now examining this radar data, a secret map of a lost world. You trace these phantom rivers, and you see them flowing from the highlands of the radar images of a once green Sahara, crisscrossed by phantom rivers, have rewritten the map of the ancient world for you. The water was there, but the evidence you are now examining speaks of something more than life-giving rivers and fertile plains. The scouring marks on the rocks around the Richat Structure, the immense deposits of jumbled sediment, the sheer violence etched into the landscape. This is not the work of a gentle river meandering to the sea over millennia. This is the signature of a weapon. A force of nature so colossal it defies the modern imagination. You are no longer looking for evidence of a city. You are looking for evidence of its executioner. You turn back to that chilling line in Plato's Kritos, the words that have haunted the story for over 2,000 years. In a single day and night of misfortune, The island of Atlantis, in like manner, disappeared in the depths of the sea. This has always been the most fantastical element of the tale, the part most easily dismissed as mythical hyperbole. What could possibly cause an entire civilization, a city the size of a modern metropolitan area, to be wiped from existence in 24 hours? No ordinary earthquake, no normal flood, no volcanic eruption described in our history books fits the profile. But what if the event wasn't ordinary? What if it was the single most violent cataclysm to strike the planet in all of human history? This is where your investigation intersects with a controversial and terrifying scientific theory, one that is shaking the foundations of geology and archaeology. This is the verifiable fact for this section: the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. For decades, scientists were puzzled by a bizarre climatic anomaly that occurred around 12,800 years ago. After a long period of gradual warming that was bringing the world out of the last ice age, the planet was suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. This cold snap is called the Younger Dryas. For a long time, no one had a good explanation for it. Then, in the early 2000s, a team of scientists presented a radical and frightening hypothesis. They proposed that the trigger for the Younger Dryas was an extraterrestrial impact. Not a single giant asteroid like the one that killed the dinosaurs, but something more complex. A fragmented comet or asteroid that broke up in the atmosphere and rained down a barrage of fire and ice across multiple continents. The epicenter of this cataclysm, they argue, was the Great Laurentide ice sheet that covered North America at the time. The evidence they have gathered is staggering. At the geological layer corresponding to 12,800 years ago, they have found a black mat spanning condensa, layer rich in soot from continent-spanning wildfires. Within this layer, they've found microscopic nanodiamonds, which can only be formed by the extreme shock and pressure of a cosmic impact. They've found melt glass and microscopic metallic spherules, the fallout from an object exploding with the force of millions of nuclear bombs. You are now imagining the effects of such an impact. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis provides a terrifyingly elegant solution. It gives you a mechanism for destruction, a date that aligns with Plato's timeline, and a cataclysm powerful enough to erase a civilization. The megaflood, the world-drowning tsunami, born from a shattered ice sheet, seems to explain everything. It is the perfect crime, leaving behind a landscape scoured clean and a mystery wrapped in myth. You feel the case closing. But just as you are about to declare it solved, a single, stubborn fact stands in defiance, a detail so glaringly obvious it threatens to unravel the entire theory. You pull up the topographic data for the Richat Structure once more. You are looking at its elevation. This is the mundane, verifiable, public detail that acts as the prosecution's star witness against your case. The Richat Structure is not at sea level. It is not even close. The outer edges of the structure sit at an elevation of approximately 200 meters, about 650 feet. The implication is devastating. Mega tsunami, no matter how colossal, is still just a wave. It could wash over the structure, burying it in sediment and debris, scouring its surface, and annihilating its population. But once the floodwaters recede, the structure would still be there, a ruined city high on a plateau. It would not have disappeared in the depths of the sea. Plato's words are specific. He describes a sinking, a submersion. The landmass itself went down. The Richat Structure stands high and dry. This single, irrefutable number, 400 meters, seems to be the fatal flaw, the piece of evidence that sends you right back to the beginning, forcing you to conclude that the resemblance, however stunning, must be a coincidence after all. The case is not closed. Feels like it has just been blown wide open. You are about to abandon the location to consign it to the file of fascinating but failed hypotheses. But then you encounter an idea so radical, so far outside the bounds of conventional science, that it makes the Younger Dryas impact seem tame. It's a theory that doesn't just challenge the historical timeline, but the very stability of the ground beneath your feet. This is the bizarre, quirky detail that offers a desperate, almost unthinkable solution. The theory of Earth's crust displacement. The theory of a slipping crust and a rising continent is a dizzying planetary-scale concept. It solves the elevation problem with a terrifying elegance. But grand theories, no matter how compelling, are weightless without physical proof. The ground may have shifted, the oceans may have raged, but the final verdict must be rendered by what lies in the dirt. Your investigation must now descend from the godlike view of satellite imagery and cosmic theories to the gritty reality of archaeology. You must ask the most fundamental question: what has actually been found at the Richat Structure? This is where the grand narrative of Atlantis collides with a stark and disappointing reality. You search for official archaeological reports from the site, expecting to find records of extensive excavations, detailed site maps, and robust debates over anomalous findings. Instead, you find an almost deafening silence. This is the mundane, verifiable fact that the skeptics wield like a club. There has been no major, systematic archaeological excavation of the Richat structure. The limited surveys that have been conducted have yielded nothing that would trouble the mainstream historical narrative. Archaeologists have found scattered artifacts mostly belonging to the Etruscan and Neolithic cultures. These finds consist of typical Stone Age tools, arrowheads, scrapers, and crude pottery. The official conclusion, therefore, is simple and dismissive. The Richat Structure was never the site of a grand metropolis. It was, at best, a place of temporary or intermittent habitation for nomadic Stone Age hunter-gatherers who were drawn to the area for its shelter and access to flint for their tools. The case, from the perspective of mainstream archaeology, is closed. The artifacts are too primitive, the timeline is wrong, and there are no ruins. The lack of evidence is presented as evidence of lack of civilization. But you pause, considering the scale of the place. The Richat Structure is 40 kilometers across. Its total area is over 1,200 square kilometers, larger than New York City. To conduct a scattered survey, find a few Stone Age arrowheads, and declare the entire region void of higher civilization is a breathtaking leap of logic.
Brackets.
The scattered stone tools and the faint outlines of buried structures hint at a lost world, but they lack the undeniable signature of a high civilization. They are circumstantial evidence, open to interpretation and dismissal. To truly connect the Richat Structure to Plato's legend, you need something more specific. Something that cannot be explained away as Neolithic happenstance. You need a smoking gun. And Plato, in his blueprint, provided one. It is a detail that has been the obsession of treasure hunters and the bane of serious historians for centuries. The hunt for that strange mythical metal he called orichalcum. You return to the Cretaceous, your eyes zeroing in on the description of this wondrous substance.
Ow.
He states that it was mined from the earth in many parts of the island, and that, in those ancient days, it was the most precious of metals with the exception of gold. He says its name was known. But the metal itself no longer existed in his time. And he gives one critical visual clue. It flashed with the red light. The wall of the central citadel, the Holy of Holies of the Atlantean Empire, was not just decorated with this metal. It was entirely covered in it. Imagine seeing this from a distance. A city whose heart glowed like a burning coal, a beacon of otherworldly wealth and power. For centuries, the very name orichalcum was considered proof that Atlantis was a myth. It sounds like something from a fantasy novel, a magical element like mithril. No such metal exists in the periodic table. Scholars have long argued it was a poetic invention by Plato, a symbol of the city's corrupting luxury. They have offered mundane explanations, suggesting it was simply a flowery name for a known copper alloy like brass, a mix of copper and zinc, or bronze, copper, and tin, which can have a reddish-gold appearance. But Plato specifically states orichalcum was mined from the earth, suggesting it was a natural or not a man-made alloy. This is the verifiable historical fact. The debate over orichalcum's nature is as old as the story itself. Your investigation now takes you from geology and archaeology into the world of metallurgy and chemistry. What could this fire-gleaming metal actually be, if it was a natural, or what kind? You begin to research the mineralogy of the Richat Structure and the surrounding Adrar Plateau. The geological surveys are dry and technical, but buried within them are clues. The region, the correlations are a powerful sedative, lulling you into a state of near certainty. The rings, the measurements, the geography, the cataclysm, the metal each piece locks into the next, forming a narrative so cohesive it feels indestructible. You are on the verge of belief, ready to declare the Richat Structure as the definitive site of Atlantis. And it is precisely at this moment of maximum confidence that your investigation requires you to do the most difficult thing of all. You must become your own harshest critic. You must actively try to destroy your own theory. You must inhabit the mind of a skeptical geologist and build the perfect, most rational rebuttal. Your first and most powerful weapon is Occam's razor. The principle that the simplest explanation is usually the best one. And the simplest explanation for the Richat Structure has been on the table since the beginning. It is not a city. It is a rock. You are looking at a deeply eroded geologic dome, a feature known to geologists as a domed anticline. This is the mainstream consensus view, and it is backed by a century of geological science. This theory doesn't require lost civilizations, planetary cataclysms, or radical shifts in the Earth's crust. It just requires time and the known forces of nature. You begin to construct the argument, brick by scientific brick. The story begins not 12,000 years ago, but over 100 million years ago. During the Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs still walked the Earth, deep beneath what is now the Sahara, a massive plume of molten rock, or magma, pushed upwards from the Earth's mantle. This underground pressure forced the overlying layers of sedimentary rocks and stone. Limestone, shale to bulge upwards, creating a huge, gentle dome on the surface, many kilometers across. This is the first key point of the rebuttal. The structure is not man-made. It is the result of a process called magmatic uplift. Over the subsequent tens of millions of years, this dome was subjected to erosion. Wind and water began to wear away at its surface. This is where the rings come from. The different layers of sedimentary rock have different levels of hardness. The softer layers, like shale, erode more quickly, forming the circular valleys or depressions. The harder, more resistant layers, like the quartzite that forms the main ridges, erode much more slowly. You have meticulously constructed the skeptic's case. The Richat Structure is a natural wonder, a textbook example of a domed anticline formed over 100 million years by the slow, grinding forces of uplift and erosion. The rings are layers of rock, the colors are mineral deposits. The water damage is from an ancient rainy period. Every correlation with Plato's story is a coincidence. The case is clean, scientific, and authoritative. It feels like the end of the road, a definitive and rational conclusion. And yet it leaves you with a profound sense of intellectual unease. It is an answer that explains everything but satisfies nothing. You are now forced to weigh two competing improbabilities. The Atlantis theory requires you to believe in a lost civilization, a global cataclysm, and radical geological theories like crestal displacement. The mainstream geological theory, while simpler, requires you to believe in a statistical miracle. It asks you to accept that nature, through purely random processes, just happened to create a formation that accidentally matches a detailed, multi-point ancient architectural blueprint. Your task is to dissect that coincidence and examine just how probable or improbable it truly is. Let's break down the layers of this supposed accident. First, nature had to create a concentric ring structure. Geologic domes exist, but few are as perfectly circular and symmetrical as the Richat Structure. Most are oblong, irregular, or incomplete. Right from the start, we are dealing with a rare and unusually perfect specimen. Second, the number and arrangement of the rings had to match. Plato specified a central island, 2 land rings, and 3 water rings. The Richat Structure, when you filter out the minor erosional ripples, displays this exact fundamental pattern of a central plateau surrounded by 2 major ridges land rings, and 3 major depressions water rings. So nature not only created rings, but created the correct number of them in the correct sequence. The odds are lengthening. Third, the dimensions had to be scalable. This is perhaps the most staggering part of the coincidence. It's not just a visual match, it's a mathematical one. The real-world measurements of the Richat structure align with Plato's given dimensions with breathtaking precision. The debate between a statistical miracle and a lost history has reached a fever pitch in your mind. The evidence for both sides is compelling, and you find yourself trapped in a logical stalemate. To break the deadlock, you realize you must leave the physical evidence of the Richat structure behind and return to the story itself. You must follow the chain of custody. If the tale of Atlantis is true, it is not just a story Plato invented. It is a piece of data that was transmitted through time. Your investigation now becomes a work of historical forensics, tracing the narrative back to its source, looking for cracks, inconsistencies, or confirmations in its provenance. You go back to the beginning, to Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias. Plato does not claim to have invented the story. This is a critical and verifiable fact. He puts the tale in the mouth of his own greatuncle, Critias, who claims he is reciting it from memory. Critias says he heard the story as a young boy, around the age of 10, from his grandfather, also named Critias. His grandfather, then 90 years old, told him it was a true story, a treasured family heirloom of knowledge. And where did the grandfather get it? From his own father Dropids, who was a close friend and relative of the most respected figure in Athenian history, Solon. Solon is the key. He was not a mythical figure. He was a real, celebrated Athenian statesman, poet, and lawmaker who lived about 200 years before Plato. He is credited with laying the foundations of Athenian democracy. His reputation for wisdom and integrity was legendary. Critias explicitly states that Solon was the original source of the story. Around 590 BCE, during his travels, Solon journeyed to Egypt, the cradle of ancient wisdom. He went to the city of Sais in the Nile Delta, a center of learning with ancient and revered temples. There in the holy sanctums he spoke with the Egyptian priests. Initially, he tried to impress them by recounting Greek history and mythology, the great flood of Deucalion, the lineage of their heroes. The eldest of the priests, whose name is not given, is said to have smiled and replied with a statement that cuts through the ages, "O Solon. Solon, you Hellenes Greeks are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." The priest explained that the Greeks, through various cataclysms of fire and the chain of custody for the Atlantis story leads directly to a quiet temple in the ancient Egyptian city of Sais. The entire narrative hinges on the testimony of a single, unnamed priest speaking to the Athenian lawmaker Solon. The credibility of the entire mystery, therefore, rests on the credibility of its source. You must now turn your focus to the guardians of that source, the notoriously meticulous, secretive, and ancient civilization of Egypt. What might they have known that we have forgotten? You begin by examining the Egyptian psyche, their obsession with time, eternity, and the preservation of knowledge. This is a civilization that developed one of the world's first complex writing systems, hieroglyphics, and used it to carve their history into stone, a medium designed to last forever. They built monumental libraries, like the one at Alexandria, which aimed to contain the entirety of human knowledge. This is the verifiable historical fact at the core of this section. Ancient Egypt was a civilization of record keepers. Their entire culture was oriented around recording the present and preserving the past for a future they envisioned as eternal. The priests' claim to Solon that the Greeks were children with no deep history was not just an idle boast. From the Egyptian perspective, it was a simple statement of fact. By Solon's time, around 600 BCE, Egyptian civilization was already over 2,500 years old. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had survived invasions and droughts. Their king lists, like the Turin King Papyrus and the Abydos King List, were attempts to create an unbroken chronological record of their rulers stretching back into the mythical first time or Zep-Tepi, when gods were said to rule the land. While modern historians view these early parts of the lists as mythological, the Egyptians themselves treated them as genuine history. This is where the story takes a bizarre turn into the world of alternative Egyptology. You encounter the work of researchers who argue that we have fundamentally misunderstood the scope and age of Egyptian knowledge. They point to documents like the Turin Papyrus, which lists not only historical pharaohs, but also reigns of demigods and spirits of the dead that preceded them. You have followed the chain of evidence from a geological anomaly in Africa back to a temple in ancient Egypt. The logic holds, the pieces connect, but one monumental obstacle remains. It is not a missing piece of evidence or a scientific contradiction, but a number, a single, impossible number that has been the primary reason for academia's dismissal of the Atlantis story from the very beginning. You must now confront the 9,000-year problem. Plato, through Critias, who is quoting the Egyptian priest, is stunningly clear on the timeline. The war between prehistoric Athens and Atlantis, and the subsequent cataclysm that destroyed them both, did not happen in the recent past. It happened 9,000 years before the time of Solon. Solon visited Egypt around 600 BCE. This places the destruction of Atlantis at approximately 9600 BCE, or 11,600 years before our present day. You let that number sink in? 11,600 years ago? This is the verifiable fact that shatters our entire conception of the ancient world. According to every textbook, every museum display, and every university curriculum, what was happening 11,600 years ago? Humanity was firmly in the Stone Age. We were hunter-gatherers, living in small nomadic tribes. The Great Agricultural Revolution was still centuries or even millennia in the future. The first cities, like those in Mesopotamia, wouldn't appear for another 6,000 years. The first Egyptian pyramids were still 7,000 years away. In this established timeline, the idea of a highly organized seafaring empire with advanced metallurgy, canal building, and organized armies existing 11,600 years ago is not just wrong. It's absurd. It's like finding a jet engine in a medieval castle. It simply does not fit. The 9,000-year problem stands as a monumental barrier, a date so ancient it seems to relegate Atlantis to the realm of pure fantasy. The established historical timeline, with its slow, linear progression from hunter-gatherers to city-dwellers, simply has no room for a powerful seafaring empire in 10,000 BCE. To believe in Atlantis is to believe this entire timeline is wrong. For decades, this was an untenable position, an argument based on a single, uncorroborated story. But you are now investigating this mystery in an era of unprecedented discovery. The ground beneath the old historical consensus is beginning to crack. Your investigation now shifts to a series of stunning archaeological discoveries made in the last few decades. Finds that are so radical, they are forcing a complete rewrite of prehistoric human capability. The most significant of these is a site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. This is a verifiable historical fact that has sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. First excavated in the mid-1990s, Göbekli Tepe is a vast ceremonial complex of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons and standing over 18 feet tall. They are arranged in large circular enclosures, and many are covered in sophisticated high-relief carvings of animals like foxes, lions, snakes, and vultures. It is, by any measure, a stunning architectural and artistic achievement. But what makes Göbekli Tepe so revolutionary is its age. Using radiocarbon dating, archaeologists have confidently dated the site's construction to between 9,600 and 8,200 BCE. The oldest layers were built roughly 11,600 years ago. Let that number sink in. This is not a collection of mud huts. This is a massive megalithic temple complex, built with incredible skill and organization, at the very same time that Plato's Atlantis was said to have been destroyed. It was built 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the first pyramids. And crucially, it was built by a people who, according to the old timeline, were supposed to be nothing more than simple hunter-gatherers. Göbekli Tepe single-handedly demolishes the old theory that agriculture had to come before complex society and monumental architecture. It proves that hunter-gatherers were capable of organizing massive labor forces, quarrying and transporting enormous stones over long distances, and creating sophisticated symbolic art. It proves that high culture existed deep in our primitive past. The impossible date of Atlantis is no longer so impossible. We now have physical proof that a highly advanced and organized culture was thriving right at that time. And this leads you to the bizarre and controversial idea of a lost predecessor civilization. Göbekli Tepe is such a sudden and sophisticated arrival in the archaeological record, with no apparent precursor, that it has led some researchers to ask a radical question. What if it wasn't an invention, but an inheritance? What if the knowledge of how to build such structures was passed down from an even earlier, now lost civilization that was destroyed in the Younger Dryas cataclysm? In this view, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were the survivors, the inheritors of a shattered legacy, attempting to rebuild their world and preserve their ancestral knowledge in stone. The animal carvings are seen not just as art, but as a complex astronomical code, a way of recording the date of the very cataclysm that destroyed their world. The evidence doesn't stop in Turkey. You look to other parts of the world. In Indonesia, there is the massive site of Gunung Padang, a pyramid-like hill covered in megalithic stone columns. The physical evidence has taken you on a journey from a strange formation in the Sahara to the megalithic temples of prehistoric Turkey. You've grappled with geology, archaeology, and astronomy. But now, you must turn inward. You must put the physical world aside and enter the realm of psychology, to ask a question that is, in many ways, more profound than any question of fact. Why did Plato tell this story? What was his motive? Is he a historian, a liar, or something else entirely? The traditional mainstream answer is clear. Plato was a philosopher, and he told the story of Atlantis as a philosophical allegory, a cautionary tale. This is a verifiable fact about how his work has been interpreted for most of history. In this view, the entire narrative is a brilliant literary device designed to explore themes of political virtue, the dangers of imperial hubris, and the cyclical nature of history. Atlantis, with its divine origins and eventual corruption by greed and power, represents the archetypal fallen state. Prehistoric Athens, a simple, virtuous, and communally organized society, represents Plato's ideal state, similar to the one he outlines in his most famous work, The Republic. The war between them is a grand thought experiment, a battle between virtue and decadence. The cataclysmic end of Atlantis is the ultimate moral lesson, that no matter how powerful or technologically advanced a society becomes, moral decay will inevitably lead to its destruction. This interpretation is elegant, intellectually satisfying, and requires no uncomfortable rewriting of history. It allows us to appreciate the story as a work of genius, without having to believe in sunken continents. It fits perfectly within our understanding of Plato as a moral and political philosopher. His goal was not to record history, but to shape the future by warning his fellow Athenians about the path to ruin.
Oh, the story is a mirror held up to his own society.
But as you consider this explanation, it begins to feel incomplete. It doesn't account for the obsessive, almost neurotic level of detail. The measurements of the canals, the colors of the stone, the name of the metal, the precise date of 9,000 years. Allegories don't need this level of specificity. In fact, specificity weakens an allegory by tethering it to a single, literal interpretation. A story about a generic, rich city is a more powerful moral lesson than a story about a rich city with a 300-foot-wide canal to the sea. This leads you to a more complex and psychologically nuanced interpretation. What if the story is not as simple either? Or what if it is both history and allegory? What if Plato received a genuine historical account, a fragmented, corrupted memory of a real prehistoric civilization, and a real cataclysm passed down via Solon from the Egyptian priest? Sand then used that factual kernel as the foundation upon which to build his philosophical lesson. In this model, Plato is neither a perfect historian nor a simple fabulist. He is a synthesizer. He is taking a piece of unexplored perspective, a shocking piece of... Your investigation has reached a critical juncture. You've established a plausible connection between the Richat Structure and Plato's story. A plausible mechanism for its destruction in the Younger Dryas cataclysm, and a plausible context for its existence in a forgotten chapter of prehistory. But the entire theory feels ethereal, suspended in a web of correlations and controversial science. To ground it, you need evidence of a different kind. Human evidence. You need to find proof that other people at other times knew about this location and its significance long before the age of satellites. You are now hunting for a ghost in the historical record, a whisper of a secret past, down through unseen channels. Your search leads you to the shadowy world of cartography and the activities of what Plato might call historical organizations with limited public records. You begin with one of the most famous and enigmatic maps in history, the Piri race map of 1513. This is a verifiable historical artifact, a map drawn on a gazelle skin by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. What makes the map so extraordinary is that it appears to show the coastlines of South America and Antarctica with stunning accuracy. Long before they were officially discovered and surveyed, Piri Reis himself wrote on the map that he compiled it from numerous older source maps, some of which dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, or even earlier. This is the first bizarre detail. 16th century admiral possessing maps that contain geographical knowledge that shouldn't have existed in his time. The implication is staggering. It suggests the existence of a continuous, but hidden, tradition of cartography. A legacy of knowledge passed down from a much more ancient seafaring civilization. While the Piri Reis map does not show the Richat structure, it establishes a powerful precedent. It proves that ancient cartographers may have known far more about the globe than our standard history admits. Now, you turn your focus to North Africa. You uncover a series of medieval and Renaissance maps, known as Portolan charts, which were used by sailors in the Mediterranean. These maps are famous for their uncanny accuracy. But as you study their depictions of the African coast, you notice a recurring anomaly. Many of them, like the 14th century maps of Angelino Dulzert, show strange circular features or stylized cities in the approximate location of the Mauritanian interior. They are often depicted with radial lines emanating from a central point, almost like a compass rose, but centered on the land. Are these merely decorative elements, artistic flourishes to fill an empty space on the map? Or are they faint, distorted memories of a great circular city that was once known to exist in that region? The trail gets even stranger when you begin to research the activities of certain historical organizations that have long been associated with esoteric knowledge and sacred geometry. You look into the history of groups like the Knights Templar. Founded in the 12th century, their official purpose was to protect Christian pilgrims. But their 9-year excavation of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem has led to endless speculation that their true mission was to recover sacred relics and lost knowledge from the time of Solomon. Following their suppression in the early 14th century, their knowledge and traditions are said to have been absorbed by other groups, including the Freemasons. You find that a central tenet of Masonic symbolism is sacred geometry and the art of building. Your investigation has led you down a labyrinth of conflicting evidence. From geology to mythology, from satellite imagery to ancient texts, you have chased a ghost across millennia. But the mystery of Atlantis and the Richat structure is not just about a lost city, it is about a lost part of ourselves. The story resonates so deeply not because of its architectural details, but because it speaks to a profound and terrifying aspect of the human condition. Our species' capacity for collective amnesia? You are now looking at the psychological pattern that underlies this entire mystery. The rise and fall of civilizations is the drumbeat of history. Empires that seem eternal, the Romans, the Mongols, the British will eventually crumble. It is a verifiable historical fact that civilizations have a life cycle. They are born, they mature, they decay, and they die. We accept this as a natural process. But the Atlantis story suggests something far more extreme. It suggests a cycle of near-total obliteration, a recurring reset button that doesn't just end a civilization but erases its memory from the world. Think about the world 12,800 years ago. At the onset of the Younger Dryas, imagine a global, technologically advanced civilization with a network of cities, mastery of the seas, and a deep understanding of astronomy and engineering. They are the undisputed masters of the planet. Then, a cataclysm occurs. A fragmented comet strikes the ice caps, triggering global wildfires, atmospheric dust clouds that blot out the sun, and continent-drowning megatsunamis. In a matter of days, their world is annihilated. The great coastal cities are submerged. The centers of learning are destroyed. The majority of the population perishes. Who are the survivors? They are not the scholars in the libraries or the politicians in the capital. They are the scattered, traumatized few who were lucky enough to be in high-altitude inland areas, away from the epicenters of destruction. They are left in a post-apocalyptic world. Their infrastructure is gone, their supply chains are broken, their knowledge base is shattered, They are thrown back into a desperate struggle for immediate survival, finding food, water, and shelter. In this environment, what happens to knowledge? The ability to perform complex calculus or write epic poetry becomes useless. The knowledge that survives is the most practical. How to hunt, how to nap a stone tool, how to find edible plants. The higher knowledge becomes a garbled memory, a story told around a campfire. The memory of advanced metallurgy becomes a myth about gods who could shape metal like clay. The memory of astronomy becomes a mythology of sky beings and celestial battles. The memory of the cataclysm itself becomes a story of a great flood sent by angry gods to punish a sinful humanity, a story that, in a bizarre and telling detail, exists in hundreds of cultures all across the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah. This is the cycle of collective amnesia. A high civilization is destroyed. The survivors are reduced to a primitive state. Over thousands of years, they slowly begin to rebuild. They rediscover agriculture. They build villages, then towns, then cities. They invent writing again. They look back at the fragmentary myths and legends passed down from their ancestors and dismiss them as fantasy. The fanciful stories of primitive people. They have no idea that they are merely climbing back up a ladder that their ancestors had already scaled to its highest rung. They believe they are the first. From this perspective, our entire recorded history, from the Sumerians around 4000 BCE to the present day, is not the story of humanity. It is the story of the current cycle, the slow rebuilding after the last great forgetting. The 7,000-year gap between the destruction of Atlantis and the rise of Sumer is the great silent amnesiac period. This changes your perception of everything. The historical organizations with limited public records, the secret societies, are no longer just keepers of a quirky secret. They become the institutional memory of humanity. Organizations dedicated to preserving the knowledge of the previous. The realization that history might be cyclical, a story of repeated forgetting, has shifted your perspective. The Atlantis mystery is no longer a fringe curiosity. It is a central question about the nature of our own past. But for decades, this question was purely academic, a debate confined to books and lecture halls. The Richat Structure itself remained a remote and inaccessible enigma, a place seen by astronauts and a few hardy geologists, but largely ignored by the world. Your investigation now arrives in the modern era, where this dynamic began to change, driven not by large institutions, but by the relentless passion of a few individuals who dared to do what no one else would. Take Plato's texts literally. You are now following the journey of the modern-day Argonauts. The independent researchers who looked at the satellite images, read Plato's words, and decided to see for themselves. This is the story of a transition from armchair theory to boots-on-the-ground fieldwork. In the early 2000s, as high-resolution satellite imagery became more accessible to the public through platforms like Google Earth, a new generation of investigators began to notice the startling resemblance between the Richat Structure and Plato's description. Among the first to popularize the theory in the digital age were writers and alternative historians, who saw the connections others were missing. They produced articles, books, and early online documentaries, juxtaposing the satellite photos with the text of the Critias. They were met with widespread ridicule from the academic establishment. They were dismissed as amateurs, pseudoscientists, and Google Earth archaeologists who saw patterns where none existed. The geological explanation for the structure was presented as a definitive rebuttal, but they persisted. The turning point came when these researchers decided they could no longer rely on remote viewing. They had to go there. This is a verifiable fact of the modern investigation. A small but dedicated number of independent explorers have, over the last decade, funded their own expeditions into one of the most remote and inhospitable parts of the Sahara Desert. Their journeys are arduous and dangerous. They navigate a politically unstable region with no established tourist infrastructure to reach a site that is hundreds of miles from the nearest major city. Their footage, posted online for the world to see, is raw and electrifying. You watch as they arrive at the structure, their vehicles dwarfed by the scale of the outer rings. What looks like a flat circle from space reveals itself to be a landscape of towering ridges and deep valleys. They climb the cuestas, the land rings, and find themselves in a world littered with ancient artifacts. They filmed the ground, showing landscapes so dense with worked stone tools that it seems impossible to be the site of a mere nomadic encampment. They find strange, spherical stone balls, perfectly round, whose purpose is a complete mystery. They find what appear to be ancient grinding stones and the remnants of primitive hearths. This is the bizarre and powerful nature of their work. They are not conducting official, gridded archaeological surveys. They're simply walking the land, guided by Plato's blueprint, and documenting what they find. They hike to the salt deposits in the southern part of the structure, pointing out that Plato described the city as having access to abundant salt. They break open rocks to show the reddish copper-bearing minerals, arguing that this is the source of the legendary orichalcum. They are, in essence, fact-checking Plato in the real world. Their work represents a paradigm shift in how historical mysteries are investigated. They are bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of knowledge, the universities, the museums, the peer-reviewed journals, and presenting their evidence directly to the public. They have created a decentralized, open-source investigation where anyone with an internet connection can analyze their footage, examine their findings, and draw their own conclusions. They are crowdsourcing a revolution in historical thought. Of course, their methods are criticized as unscientific. Their findings are unverified by official bodies. They are accused of confirmation bias, of only seeing what they want to see, but their contribution is undeniable. They have dragged the Atlantis debate out of the realm of pure theory and placed it firmly in the physical world. They have shown that the site is not a barren geological oddity, but a place rich with the remnants of a significant ancient human presence. They have transformed a satellite image into a tangible destination, a place of pilgrimage for those who believe our history is deeper and more mysterious than we have been told. But the real question remained. If a handful of passionate amateurs with limited resources could find this much evidence, what would a well-funded, systematic, and unbiased international expedition uncover if they finally dared to look? The realization that history might be cyclical, a story of repeated forgetting, has shifted your perspective. The Atlantis mystery is no longer a fringe curiosity. It is a central question about the nature of our own past. But for decades, this question was purely academic, a debate confined to books and lecture halls. The Richat Structure itself remained a remote and inaccessible enigma, a place seen by astronauts and a few hardy geologists, but largely ignored by the world. Your investigation now arrives in the modern era, where this dynamic began to change, driven not by large institutions, but by the relentless passion of a few individuals who dared to do what no one else would. Take Plato's texts literally. You are now following the journey of the modern-day Argonauts. The independent researchers who looked at the satellite images, read Plato's words, and decided to see for themselves. This is the story of a transition from armchair theory to boots-on-the-ground fieldwork. In the early 2000s, as high-resolution satellite imagery became more accessible to the public through platforms like Google Earth, a new generation of investigators began to notice the startling resemblance between the Richat structure and Plato's description. Among the first to popularize the theory in the digital age were writers and alternative historians, who saw the connections others were missing. They produced articles, books, and early online documentaries, juxtaposing the satellite photos with the text of the Critias. They were met with widespread ridicule from the academic establishment. They were dismissed as amateurs, pseudoscientists, and Google Earth archaeologists who saw patterns where none existed. The geological explanation for the structure was presented as a definitive rebuttal, but they persisted. The turning point came when these researchers decided they could no longer rely on remote viewing. They had to go there. This is a verifiable fact of the modern investigation. A small but dedicated number of independent explorers have, over the last decade, funded their own expeditions into one of the most remote and inhospitable parts of the Sahara Desert. Their journeys are arduous and dangerous. They navigate a politically unstable region with no established tourist infrastructure to reach a site that is hundreds of miles from the nearest major city. Their footage, posted online for the world to see, is raw and electrifying. You watch as they arrive at the structure, their vehicles dwarfed by the scale of the outer rings. What looks like a flat circle from space reveals itself to be a landscape of towering ridges and deep valleys. They climb the cuestas, the land rings, and find themselves in a world littered with ancient artifacts. They filmed the ground, showing landscapes so dense with worked stone tools that it seems impossible to be the site of a mere nomadic encampment. They find strange, spherical stone balls, perfectly round, whose purpose is a complete mystery. They find what appear to be ancient grinding stones and the remnants of primitive hearths. This is the bizarre and powerful nature of their work. They are not conducting official, gridded archaeological surveys. They're simply walking the land, guided by Plato's blueprint, and documenting what they find. They hike to the salt deposits in the southern part of the structure, pointing out that Plato described the city as having access to abundant salt. They break open rocks to show the reddish copper-bearing minerals, arguing that this is the source of the legendary orichalcum. They are, in essence, fact-checking Plato in the real world. Their work represents a paradigm shift in how historical mysteries are investigated. They are bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of knowledge, the universities, the museums, the peer-reviewed journals, and presenting their evidence directly to the public. They have created a decentralized, open-source investigation where anyone with an internet connection can analyze their footage, examine their findings, and draw their own conclusions. They are crowdsourcing a revolution in historical thought. Of course, their methods are criticized as unscientific. Their findings are unverified by official bodies. They are accused of confirmation bias, of only seeing what they want to see, but their contribution is undeniable. They have dragged the Atlantis debate out of the realm of pure theory and placed it firmly in the physical world. They have shown that the site is not a barren geological oddity, but a place rich with the remnants of a significant ancient human presence. They have transformed a satellite image into a tangible destination, a place of pilgrimage for those who believe our history is deeper and more mysterious than we have been told. But the real question remained. If a handful of passionate amateurs with limited resources could find this much evidence, what would a well-funded, systematic, and unbiased international expedition uncover if they finally dared to look? The journey of the modern explorers, armed with GPS and consumer drones, marks a crucial chapter in this unfolding mystery. But their work is only one half of a technological revolution that has completely reshaped the search for Atlantis. Our investigation now turns to the silent orbital sentinels that started it all, the satellites. You are exploring how the digital democratization of our planet's surface has created a new kind of archaeology, global open-source investigation that is happening in real time. It began, as you've seen, in the 1960s. The first blurry photographs of the Richat Structure, taken by Gemini astronauts, were a curiosity, a strange landmark in a vast desert. For decades, access to this kind of eye in the sky was the exclusive privilege of governments, militaries, and well-funded scientific institutions. The public saw only what these gatekeepers chose to release. The data was sparse, low resolution, and jealously guarded. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, everything changed. The launch of commercial satellite imaging companies and, most importantly, the creation of public-facing platforms like Google Earth represented a fundamental shift in power. This is the verifiable fact that defines this era. For the first time in history, any person with a computer could fly anywhere on Earth, zoom in on any location, and examine it with a level of detail that was previously unimaginable. It was as if humanity had collectively developed a new sense. This new sense was immediately applied to old mysteries. People began scanning the globe, looking for anomalies. They searched for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, for lost cities in the Amazon, and, inevitably, for Atlantis. When they turned their collective attention to Plato's story, the Richat Structure was waiting. The visual parallel was so immediate and so powerful that it sparked a firestorm of online debate and speculation. The concentric rings, once a geological footnote, became an internet sensation. This digital search for Atlantis is a bizarre and uniquely 21st century phenomenon. It is a form of investigation that is both profoundly democratic and maddeningly chaotic. On one hand, it has allowed for an unprecedented level of public participation in a scientific and historical debate. Tens of thousands of curious minds are poring over the same data, sharing observations and proposing theories. This is the ultimate many-eyes approach. A person in a small town in Ohio might spot an anomalous rectangular shape that everyone else missed. A student in Japan might notice that the orientation of certain features aligns with the winter solstice sunrise. It is a global, crowdsourced brain trust working on a single problem. You are now part of this digital collective. Using the tools on your own computer, you can do things that were once the stuff of science fiction. You can use elevation data to create a 3D model of the structure, allowing you to fly through its valleys and over its ridges. You can overlay Plato's blueprint onto the terrain, testing the fit for yourself. You can access different types of satellite imagery infrared, multispectral, to look for variations in soil composition or subsurface moisture that might indicate buried structures. You can scroll back through time, using archived satellite photos from different years to see how the landscape has changed, how the sand dunes have shifted, revealing and concealing different features. On the other hand, this digital free-for-all is a breeding ground for misinformation and wild speculation. With no barrier to entry, any theory, no matter how unfounded, can gain traction. Confirmation bias runs rampant. People find pyramids, statues, and faces in the random patterns of rock and shadow. The signal is often lost in the noise. The official scientific community, already skeptical, often points to this chaos as a reason to dismiss the entire enterprise. Yet despite the noise, the digital search has undeniably pushed the investigation forward. It was the online analysis of the structure's dimensions that led to the discovery of the factor of 10 correlation. It was the collective examination of the surrounding landscape that highlighted the evidence of ancient waterways and the match with Plato's geographical description. The digital search has generated the very questions and hypotheses that the on-the-ground explorers are now attempting to verify. The two are in a symbiotic relationship, a feedback loop between the virtual and the real. The digital explorers find a target, and the field explorers go to check it out. The digital search for Atlantis has become a case study in the new landscape of truth and discovery. It is a battle between credentialed experts and a decentralized network of passionate amateurs. It demonstrates how technology can empower individuals to challenge established orthodoxies, but also how that same technology can amplify confusion and baseless conjecture. But the real question remained. Now that the eye of the Sahara has been seen by the eyes of the world, can the secret of what it truly represents be kept for much longer? You have reached the end of the labyrinth. You have followed the evidence from a geological anomaly to an ancient Greek text, from a cometary impact to the megalithic ruins of a forgotten world. You have navigated the treacherous currents of scientific dogma, historical amnesia, and digital chaos. And now you are left with the final, most important question. After all of this, what would it actually mean for Plato to have been right? The answer is not as simple as you might think. The word right is a slippery thing, a container that can hold many different kinds of truth. Your investigation has revealed that there isn't one single way for Plato to have been right, but a spectrum of possibilities, each with profound implications. At one end of the spectrum is the most literal interpretation. In this version, Plato was 100% factually correct. Every detail he wrote was a verbatim account of a real place. There was a city of concentric rings, located at the site of the Richat Structure, with a diameter of exactly 270 stadia, factoring in the 10x multiplier. With walls of brass, tin, and orichalcum, it was destroyed in a single day and night, 11,600 years ago, by a cataclysm that involved both a mega tsunami and a crustal uplift that raised it 400 meters. This is the hard history version. To accept this, you must accept every controversial theory you've encountered: the Younger Dryas impact, crustal displacement, and the existence of a natural fiery red alloy called orichalcum. It is a tall order, requiring you to discard much of what mainstream geology and history teaches, but it is the only version that perfectly accounts for every single correlation. Then there is a softer, more nuanced version. In this model, Plato was mostly right. The core of his story was true. There was a highly advanced seafaring civilization that was destroyed in a global cataclysm around 9600 BCE, and the Richat Structure is indeed its ruined capital. However, the story that reached Plato was a corrupted data file, a memory that had been distorted through 2 centuries of oral transmission and translation from Egyptian to Greek. The dimensions may have been slightly off. The description of orichalcum may have been a garbled memory of a more mundane, but still impressive copper alloy. The single day and night might have been a poetic compression of a cataclysmic period that lasted for weeks or months. In this version, Plato was acting as a faithful journalist, reporting the story as he received it, flaws and all. The Richat Structure is Atlantis, but the blueprint we have is a faded and slightly inaccurate copy. This is perhaps the most plausible version, accounting for both the stunning correlations and the minor discrepancies. Next on the spectrum is the allegorical truth. This is the view that Plato was right, but not literally. He did not describe a real city, but he correctly diagnosed a fundamental truth about human nature and the arc of history. This is the mainstream scholarly view, but with a twist. It holds that civilizations are prone to hubris, corruption, and self-destruction, and that our own society is not immune to this cycle. The story of Atlantis is a timeless warning, a mythic template for societal collapse. In this sense, Plato was profoundly right in his psychological and political analysis. The story is not true because it happened in the past. It is true because it keeps happening over and over again. Atlantis is not a place you can find on a map. It is a destination we are always in danger of reaching. Finally, there is the most unsettling possibility of all, the archetypal truth. In this version, the question of whether Plato was right or wrong is irrelevant. The story of Atlantis, like the Garden of Eden or the Great Flood, is not a memory of a single historical event, but an archetype, a pattern embedded deep within the human collective unconscious. It is a story that our species is compelled to tell itself, a recurring dream of a lost golden age, a paradise destroyed by our own flaws. The fact that the Richat Structure so perfectly matches this archetypal story is not a clue to a lost city, but a sign of something far stranger. A resonance between the patterns of the human mind and the patterns of the natural world. The Earth itself, through a random act of geology, created a symbol that speaks directly to one of our oldest and deepest myths. It is a coincidence so profound it feels like a message, a Rorschach test for our entire species. You are left to choose your own position on this spectrum. Is the Richat Structure a fossilized city, the corrupted memory of one, a philosophical warning, or a geological synchronicity? Each answer forces you to reevaluate what you think you know about history, science, and the nature of truth itself. The search for Atlantis was never just about finding a lost city. It was always about finding the limits of our own understanding. But the real question remained. Now that you have seen the evidence and weighed the possibilities, where on this spectrum of truth do you stand? Your journey is complete. You've descended through every layer of this profound and persistent mystery, from the silent, orbiting gaze of a satellite to the ink-stained words of a 2,400-year-old dialogue. You have weighed the cold, hard certainty of geology against the explosive possibilities of a forgotten history. You have seen how a single, anomalous feature on the surface of the Earth can act as a key, unlocking a cascade of questions that challenge the very foundations of who we think we are. And now you stand at the end, in the quiet aftermath of the investigation, the echoes of every argument and every piece of evidence swirling around you. The path here was a treacherous one. You started with the blueprint, stunningly specific description of a concentric city laid out by Plato, not as a dream, but as a received history. You then made the vertiginous leap to the Richat Structure, the eye of the Sahara, a geological formation so perfectly matched to that ancient blueprint that the word coincidence begins to lose all meaning. You measured it, finding that its dimensions aligned with Plato's if you applied a simple, consistent cipher, a factor of 10. You surveyed its geography, finding mountains to the north and the ghost of a vast, fertile plain to the south, exactly as the text described. You peeled back the mask of the modern desert to reveal the green Sahara, a world of rivers and lakes that could have easily supported a great civilization. You found a terrifyingly plausible kill mechanism in the Younger Dryas impact, a scientifically supported cataclysm that occurred at the very same time Plato's Atlantis was said to have been destroyed. You wrestled with the impossible elevation, finding a desperate solution in the radical theory of crustal displacement. You dug into the dirt, finding not the grand ruins you hoped for, but a landscape littered with Stone Age tools, a scene of primitive habitation to the mainstream. But to you, a potential crush layer, the pulverized remains of a city put through a geological blender? You hunted for the mythical metal orichalcum and found a trail leading from a Sicilian shipwreck to the copper-rich rocks of the structure itself. You confronted the perfect rebuttal of the skeptics, the elegant and simple explanation of a natural geologic dome, and found it wanting, a statistical miracle that explained the how, but never the why. You traced the story back to its source in an Egyptian temple, finding it plausible that the world's oldest record keepers would remember a history that the rest of the world had forgotten. And now, here at the end, what are you left with? You are left not with a simple answer, but with a choice. A choice between two stories. The first story is the one we have been telling ourselves for centuries. It is a story of slow, linear progress, a story where we are the pinnacle of creation, the smartest and most advanced humans who have ever lived. It is a safe and comforting story. In this story, the Richat structure is just a rock, Plato's tale is just a fable, and any connection between the two is a meaningless coincidence. The second story is more difficult. It is a story of cycles, of great peaks and devastating troughs. It is a story where we are not the first, where a civilization as great or perhaps even greater than our own existed in the deep past and was wiped from the board so completely that its memory survives only as a myth. It is a humbling and terrifying story. In this story, the Richat structure is a tombstone, a final message from a lost world. The evidence does not compel you to believe either one. The final piece of the puzzle is not a fact or a measurement. It is an act of intellectual courage. It is the willingness to ask, which story fits the totality of the evidence better? Which story requires the fewer miracles? Is it a greater leap of faith to believe in a dozen layered, interlocking coincidences, or to believe that we have gotten our own history wrong? The lights in your room seem to flicker for a moment. The world outside your window feels a little less solid, a little less certain than it did before. The final unsettling question has now become your own. It is no longer about Plato or a lost city. It is about the ground beneath your feet and the timeline you inhabit. The truth is out there, buried under the shifting sands of the Sahara and the even more formidable bedrock of our own assumptions. And as you sit in the quiet darkness, you can almost hear the faint whispering echo from that forgotten world. A voice carried on the desert wind, asking a simple question across 12,000 years of silence. Now do you see?